talk about. I sent the email out. So without further ado, she's going to present certain specific topics, and we'll have plenty of time afterwards for any additional questions. So with that, take it away, Rosa.
Thanks, everybody, for having me back. And I should be thanking you for having worked last week. I stayed inside. I did not drive I-25. So senior nutrition is a broad topic, and as a result of that, I thought I'd start there. Last time we went over in depth how many grams of protein per kilogram, how many grams of carbohydrate per kilogram, and we were talking about during, before, after. So we were definitely talking about nutrient timing. What's interesting about fueling senior athletes is that the carb recommendations don't change. So it's still going to be 5 to 7 grams per kilogram regardless of what life stage you're in. And that's simply because this is endurance athletics. It doesn't change the picture just because you may have aged some. Some people feel very strongly, we talked about this last time, about being careful with their carbohydrate intake, and that's simply because in this day and age, people often fear carbohydrate and think it's problematic. Regardless of whether they're aging or not, they feel like this is what's contributing to me not being completely satisfied with my physique. So we also talked about that quite a bit last time because I was trying to reassure everybody that carbohydrate was the fuel of choice for endurance athletics. The recommendations are 60% of the diet coming from carbohydrate. I just wanted to review that in terms of what was 5 to 7 grams per kilogram. That equates to 60% of the diet being carbohydrate. And you might say, yeah, but what about the difference between training and being on a mission? Well, since many people here would be training for endurance anyway, so that they could perform when out on a mission, it doesn't change things. So I'm going to make a recommendation now for senior athletes that is different than the recommendation that I made for protein previously. And bear in mind, as you age, it's actually harder to have enough protein in the diet, and that's simply because people don't want to just eat protein, and nor should they, and yet their needs are higher as they age. It doesn't mean that you can't keep muscle on your frame as a senior athlete, just because you require more protein as you become a senior. It just means that because you have always used the muscles of your body, so you didn't become a senior athlete late in life, but instead you've aged into being a senior endurance athlete, you've got the muscle still on your frame. So what they've found is you don't lose muscle as you age if you've always used your body athletically. It's those who haven't who clearly end up with sarcopenia, which is the medical condition known as losing muscle as you age. The recommendations for protein, I'm just going to write these on the board in terms of for senior athletes. Like I said, this is a little bit higher than the recommendations I gave last time, and it's because we weren't talking about seniors. And bear in mind, I pointed out last time that it's always grams per kilogram, it's not grams per pound. Yes?
So maybe you could help define senior just a little bit. Some people seem to think, okay, age 60 or plus is a senior, when it's my understanding as early as age 40, if you don't do resistance training and eat correctly, you'll start losing 10% of your muscle mass every decade.
Okay.
Same with bone density, if you
okay.
do the right nutrition. So maybe if you could define senior,
I'd be happy to
someone that is not just 60 or 70.
I'd be happy to. So in terms of what does the research speak to in terms of senior nutrition for athletes, it is age 60 and above. So in terms of why people might be losing muscle mass as they age, long before age 60 is that regardless of the type of physical activity they're engaging in, they may not be using all different parts of their body. So let's say they are predominantly a runner, which is predominantly legs, or predominantly a cyclist, which is predominantly legs. If they didn't go and also use their upper body for something else, then yes, that's the part of the body that would be losing muscle. But their legs are actually not losing muscle as they age, according to research. People that have been athletic since they were young, who continue to be athletic as they age, don't lose muscle. They may inhabit a different physique. I'll just speak to what are the physical changes that many people experience as they age. What many females experience is that they have far less hips than they did when they were a younger athlete. So it doesn't mean they have no hips. It doesn't mean they have no power coming from the hips or the flexors of the legs. It just means their physique has changed and they do not embody the same body type that they did when younger. So there is changes to the physique. I'm using women as an example, and of course this wouldn't be true of all women. It's just true of certain body types. And in men lean out too as they age, and they notice changes, like maybe they don't have as broad of a barrel chest. That's a good example, I think, for men. Or they might say, my arm circumference was larger in the bicep when I was younger. Sure, it was larger, but to assume that all of that was muscle isn't really fair, because you're also losing other types of mass. So this is a good recommendation to go by for protein. I'm sorry I didn't write the last word in terms of making a difference. And then in terms of what you were bringing up about calcium needs, it's really true that when women hit 60 and men hit 70, that they have much greater, difficulty assimilating calcium. And so you can throw as much calcium supplements at a person, regardless of their age, senior athlete or non-senior athlete. But relying on supplements alone is not a great approach, because the research shows the supplements are not particularly effective. So you're much better off getting calcium from food. Does anyone have any questions on what are terrific calcium sources in the diet in terms of focusing more on food and less on supplements? Or do people feel pretty confident in that area? I'm happy to list some foods on the board. Okay. And we might have even gone into this territory a little bit last time. I don't remember. But I can say this, that milk and yogurt are superior calcium sources to any other dairy food, and here's why. They deliver 500 milligrams per serving, whereas other forms of dairy, cottage cheese, would only be 200. So I'm not saying not to eat cottage cheese and cheese. I'm just saying these are superior in their calcium delivery. And I think last time we did define what was the portion size on milk, what was the portion size on yogurt for 500 milligrams of calcium. But I'm going to go on with some other foods. This is a real powerhouse food for calcium delivery. And then, do people here feel confident in working with dark green leafies, chard, beet greens, things like that? Okay, so I'm just going to write the word dark green leafies because this is a little bit different than lettuce. And the reason it's different is that these are bitter greens and you cook them. And then they're a side dish. So these are the real powerhouses in calcium delivery in terms of don't rely entirely on pills. But yes, it's harder to absorb calcium, period, after age 60 in women and after age 70 in men. Okay. The most important piece of senior nutrition, other than keeping the carb grams where I was suggesting, keeping the protein grams where I was suggesting is the quality of the dietary fat that you choose. So you can get away with murder earlier as an athlete in terms of consuming saturated fat in excess of the recommendations and not choosing good quality fats. But as you age, what the research is now showing, because they're doing a lot of research on senior athletes, and that's because there's far more people who are seniors who were athletic their entire life. Otherwise, they couldn't have done the research on those who've always been athletic, because in other eras, there wouldn't have been enough people who had always been athletic. And now, that's not uncommon to have been athletic since a child and now be in your 60s and 70s and still be athletic. The other thing that they're finding is that the quality of your fat truly matters. So when you're going to engage in endurance athletics, an important food is nuts. And that doesn't mean you have to be eating them while you're out there if you don't find that food appealing. But the really important time to eat nuts is afterwards, because what the research shows is that for recovery, nuts are very important food. So I'm recommending incorporating some nuts after finishing a mission of any length, just due to what the latest research shows. Yes?
Any particular kind? Better than the other?
Oh, it's a great question. So the research was done on almonds, but here's something to know. Other nuts have monounsaturated fats in them, and what the research was really getting at is that they think it's the monounsaturated fats in nuts that was so useful. So a person could say, oh, but couldn't I just cook with good quality olive oil after a mission? Sure, but the research was done on nuts. So it was a pretty good study. It was on almonds itself. But when you look at all the different nuts and their profile, all of them have monounsaturated fat in different ratios, except macadamia. So macadamia does not. Macadamia is a saturated fat. It's a tropical plant. As you age and consider yourself a senior, you definitely want to cut way back on the saturated fat. And the way to do that is choosing leaner proteins and choosing leaner dairy foods. So that's why I was saying a person can get away with murder when they're younger, but it is problematic in terms of long-term health to stick with the heavy intake of saturated fat as you get older. And I'm sure everybody feels confident in how to buy their milk and yogurt in a lower fat version so that they're getting less saturated fat from a dairy food. And that doesn't mean you can't ever have something with more dietary fat in it. You just have to balance things out. And bear in mind, when you're after things like fuel for during or fuel for after, you really want to go after maximum nutrition. And the way to do that with carbohydrate food is choose carbohydrate food that's high in fiber, antioxidants, vitamins, and minerals. Can anyone think of a carbohydrate food that would meet this criteria where it'd be vastly different? You know how Patty asked last time, what would be a good food for after we normally serve pizza? And I'm going to speak to that tonight. It's one of the questions that I knew about in advance and planned to answer. But what would be a better source of carbohydrate than pizza for after if we were trying to shoot for these critical components within our carbohydrate, meaning pizza crust? Okay, avocado wouldn't be a carb, it would be a pure fat. But blueberries, okay, I'm going to help. You would want long-term energy, which means 2-hour energy, so you would want whole grains. Was that helpful? Whole grains. So most of the pasta that's going to get served to the group, say here in our galley, would not necessarily be whole wheat pasta. And most of the bread products that are going to get served in the galley here after a mission is not going to be 100% whole wheat bread. I'm not faulting that Search and Rescue feeds you guys afterwards. I'm just saying, in a perfect scenario, we would be after whole grains after. So let's say we didn't come back here and expect to get fed, because somehow magically we just went straight home and somebody was there making food for us. Ideally, as a senior athlete, the person that made food for you might have cooked something like brown rice and some kind of bean. And the reason why is that beans are carbs also. It's not just whole grains, and they are long-term energy also, not just whole grains. And beans also have a protein profile that makes them a beautiful post-mission food of any color. So regardless of the color of the bean, you're still going to get antioxidants, you're still going to get vitamins, you're still going to get minerals. It doesn't matter if it was a black bean or a white bean. So in nature, color's important, but so are all colors. So it doesn't mean that something's lacking because it's lighter in color versus something that's darker in color. Yes?
Is that also true for peanuts?
You mean like red-skinned peanuts versus out of the skin? Oh, you just meant a legume.
Yeah. Peanuts count?
So peanuts don't have carbohydrates, so they would not be. They would be the nut for the monounsaturated fat. It was a great question. So that's in the same family, legume, but it doesn't mean it's in the same nutrient profile. And it's actually the only nut that's in that family. All the rest of the nuts are tree nuts. So, like I said, nobody's got anybody waiting at home making them this dish after they come back from a mission. But let's say after you ate here, you were going to eat again 2 hours later, which I was advocating for. I was saying, oh, and then you'd repeat the carb intake again 2 hours later. Maybe you would gain access to whole grains and legumes 2 hours after if you were a senior athlete who was very focused on optimal recovery. So these are just ideas. I know this isn't a perfect world. And last time somebody also brought up, where should I go eat right before I hit the mission if I didn't have a way of going home first, if I was going straight from work? Well, in that scenario, I don't expect perfection either, simply because if you're going to go obtain food from outside the home, I already knew it was unlikely to be whole grains and something like legumes. So, I certainly get that eating outside the home is a very different scenario than us making our own food at home, if we even have time to do so. So that was the story on after a mission, senior athletes choosing optimal fuel, meaning carbohydrate, the most important nutrient, regardless of what we're talking before, during, or after, and what form we'd want the carbohydrate to come in. But this is also true if you're a senior athlete, to be choosing this type of carbohydrate all the time. And so you have less wiggle room to goof around with, we'll call it the whites. So as a younger athlete, you could probably burn some of that carbohydrate fuel efficiently, even if it was a white. But as you get older, you're desperately in need of these nutrients for reversing aging processes. And that's why you want to choose more and more of your carbohydrate from best sources of carbohydrate. The next piece on senior nutrition that's really important is being hydrated, and that's because as you age, your tastes change, so you might not feel thirst soon enough, you might get behind the curve. Blood flow changes, renal function changes. So many systems of the body are changing that it's easier to be behind the curve on your hydration. So you require more water as a senior athlete than you did when you were younger. And here's the recommendations for once you're a senior athlete, because even your tendons dry out. And that's why a lot of people have things like tennis elbow when they get older. It's dry tendons. the recommendations are these for fluid. I know you don't have any notice and you didn't know you were going on a mission, but ideally, for 24 hours prior to going on the mission, you would have gotten started getting hydrated. So that just means always be hydrated. Never not be hydrated. Then, 2 to 3 hours before, once again, you might not get the notice. It'd be dynamite if you could take in 14 to 20 ounces. And then every 15 to 20 minutes that you're out there on the mission, you're going to be drinking water. Which most people do anyway, just because they experience thirst. But let's say you're a senior athlete and you just don't get the thirst mechanisms kicking in quite as rapidly. Then just try to shoot for 6 to 12 ounces every 15 to 20 minutes while you're out there. And that'll really help with hydration. And then most people know this rule of thumb, which is you weigh yourself before you go do endurance athletics, and then you weigh yourself after you get back from endurance athletics, and then you rehydrate based on the number of pounds you lost. Well, most people aren't going to go get on a scale before they go get, out in the wilderness to begin their mission. So they're certainly not going to know what their weight was before the mission, but they might know their generalized weight. And so if they were out there and they were out there for a long time, you are very likely to have lost a tremendous amount of fluid. So the rule of thumb on that, in terms of how much to put in after, because this is all before, during, and now we're doing after. So for every pound lost, you want 16 to 24 ounces of fluid. It's a lot of fluid. Yeah, it'd be very hard, and I'm generalizing here. Once a person has prostate issues, this would make this incredibly complicated, right? It'd be horribly unpleasant. Okay. Oh, hey, I even have a recommendation for this. 25 to 30 grams of fiber per day. And you might say, how would I ever get that kind of fiber in my diet? A lot of vegetable eating, somebody brought up blueberries earlier, a lot of fruit eating, and then whole grains, legumes. So plant-based diet provides a lot of fiber, and it is actually not that hard to get this kind of fiber intake once you shift more to a plant-based diet, or I could say a nutrient-dense plant-based diet. It's people that are eating a lot of animal foods that tend to have very low fiber in their diet. So the average American, I think, has like 10 to 15 grams of fiber in their diet, and that's because they are mostly choosing whites in terms of how they go about getting fed. If you're not a senior, so under 60, the recommendations are actually 25 to 35 grams of fiber per day. So it goes down a little bit as you age. So that was everything on senior nutrition. Now I'm going to go to the very next thing that you guys asked me about, which was, what if you're vegetarian? What should you have in your pack? So I made a list over here. These are all jerky. So there's now a wide selection of jerkies that are vegan and vegetarian. And this one called Stonewall's has been available in natural food stores since 1990. These other ones are newer. Primal Strips has good placement at natural food stores. The rest of them you're going to want to source online. If you're ever up in Denver, in the Lincoln Broadway area, there is now a vegan market. It's a small store. It's entirely vegan. That's where I found every single one of these jerkies. They had a big wall of it. And so it helped me a lot in preparing for this talk, because then I didn't have to go hunt and peck on the internet. There aren't as many lunch meats. I couldn't find more brands than these three in terms of lunch meats. And then I came up with my own ideas of what to pack. I put some of them here. When I refer to bean spreads, I mean they sell them in the store now. They've got a black bean spread. They've got a white bean spread in the store. These are some brands. But cold bean salads is a little bit different. This is kind of like that 3-bean salad that's in the deli case. It would be perfect for people who were just trying to grab and go if they had time to pop into the supermarket. Base culture, we're going to eat that tonight, and you guys are going to love it. If you love it as much as I do, this is our coupon code for saving 25% off their website. It's sold locally at all 3 Sprouts stores, but you wouldn't be able to make use of the coupon code, only if you ordered online. Baked tofu. So a lot of vegetarians and vegans eat baked tofu because it's ready to go straight out of the pack. You don't have to cook it or make it into a dish. And it would be very packable because you just eat it. Kind of like the way people eat lunch meat. It's very, very similar in that way. It's flavored, it's tasty, it's easy to find. It's sold right next to the tofu floating in water. Yeah?
What about seitan?
Oh, let me ask you a question. Would you eat that not within a dish, just straight out of the pack if you carried it?
I make it and do, yeah.
You would? Okay, well then it was a great suggestion. I just hadn't tried it to find out. My tendency when I come home with something like tempeh or whatever is I put everything into a dish. I don't just eat it. Now, my exception is I eat baked tofu. I think it's fabulous.
I make sandwiches with it.
Perfect. Yeah. So here's the things I didn't put on the list over here, but I still wanted to mention in terms of best choices if vegetarian for putting in your pack, especially if you get to go home and grab stuff last minute. Hard-boiled eggs, cheese, dry roast edamame or chickpeas. They have crackers now that are made entirely from almond flour. The brand's called Simple Mills. And then they have crackers now with quite a bit of chickpea flour in them, and the brand's called Saffron Road. And then lastly, I didn't put it on the list, but it would work for anybody, and that is nut and seed butters. And we talked about them last time and how they're sold in the squeeze pack and they make life really simple. So those were my vegetarian ideas. Did you have others that I didn't think of?
Not that you purchase off the shelf. I mean, I make
Okay. Yeah, stuff you make at home.
flour.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you could get things made with chickpea flour at the Indian market. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that would totally work. I hadn't thought of that. Thanks for triggering that.
So are dried peas and dried edamame roughly the same?
Yeah, they're like the roasted version I was just describing, except for they sell them also not roasted, but instead just put through a dehydrator, because they got those little peas in the produce section that are in a tub that are not roasted. And I don't know if they're quite as tasty as the flavored kind, but they might be. It was a good idea in terms of it's a protein, it's packable. Okay, so that was everything I had to say about vegetarianism. Next thing that came up, people asked, hey, what about those energy drinks? And here's everything I wanted you to know about caffeine, both before, during, and after. Okay, so energy drinks. We're just going to use it interchangeably with caffeine, because it really wouldn't have mattered where you sourced your caffeine from. It could have come in a sports supplement, like gel. It could have come in coffee drink. It could have come in a tea, or it could have come in, we'll just call it Red Bull, Monster, that whole category. The thing to know about energy drinks is it actually is going to deplete your glycogen more rapidly than if you weren't dependent on caffeine. That doesn't mean never use caffeine in endurance athletics. It just means what I just said mattered. And so if a person was taking in a lot of caffeine, which some of those energy drinks have a tremendous amount of caffeine in them, and they weren't eating enough, they would end up depleting their glycogen. So if you want to use caffeine right before you go do an endurance athletics, research shows it's actually very effective. Just bear in mind, you would have had to have eaten. You couldn't do it without eating, because then you are pulling the glycogen out of your muscle and there's no restoration of that glycogen. So ideally you would eat a meal with the caffeine that you're about to ingest prior to the mission. Then after the mission, once again, fuel is the most important thing, but in the last hour of performance, so let's say it's a 14-hour mission, at hour 13, people really benefit from caffeine. So my recommendation is save it for the last hour, because you'll really notice an improvement to performance, and also consider utilizing it right before. I would say go cautiously in the during period with caffeine use. So other than depleting glycogen, here's something else to know about caffeine in general. Caffeine can also pull minerals out of your body more rapidly than you would have lost them through sweat, and that's because it's a diuretic. So focus on your minerals, put your electrolytes back in if you're going to be utilizing caffeine during, and that would be the best strategy. Okay, that was everything about energy drinks. Did anybody have any questions beyond just saying, hey, are there any concerns with energy drinks? Okay, then I'm going to transition to a separate line item, which was energy supplements. This is different than caffeine. I want to just turn you on to things that people have always used for energy in terms of what are the best supplements for energy that are out there that aren't caffeine. And the answer is, if you're a guy, this is an herb that would really help you. Korean ginseng is much more appropriate for use by men than it is by women, but it is ideal for men. There's many different types of ginseng. There's American ginseng, there's Korean, and then there's Siberian. Siberian is not a true ginseng. It's a different plant. It's called Eleutherococcus. So, Siberian ginseng would not provide energy. American ginseng is safer for women to use if they're going to use ginseng. So Korean ginseng is your best bet in terms of energy and noticing a difference. They sell ginseng root at Mountain Mama's. So it's just something to know, meaning I didn't mean in a capsule and I didn't mean in a tincture. I meant the actual root. This would be amazing if my class was ended this way. No, it wouldn't for you guys, but it would for me. I'd have a story to tell. The class only lasted 38 minutes. We're okay if I keep going though? Okay. So that was my first suggestion. My next one is you might notice an energy gain from CoQ10. And you would want to buy the highest dosage possible. It comes in different dosages. It comes in 30 milligrams. It comes in 60. It comes in 120. I'm encouraging the use of 120 milligram if you're looking for energy. And I also wasn't saying use these things all the time. I was saying these are energy supplements. They're different than energy drinks, meaning caffeine. It's a different method. Another one you might want to consider is L-Carnitine. People often can feel a lift from this amino acid. It's sold in a liquid form. The brand that used to sell this amino acid was Twin Lab. I couldn't tell you exactly who's selling it now, but you want it in a liquid form if you can obtain it that way any longer. So those are the best bets for energy. Anyone have any? Yes?
Are any of those kinds of things interfere with kinds of medications.
Oh, absolutely. Never take an herb. This one being an herb. Never take an herb unless you know the contraindications. Yeah, of any kind. CoQ10 is not contraindicated with meds. It's ubiquinone, and it's something that people take with statin meds. And that's because your own heart muscle would be making CoQ10 if you weren't taking the statin, but the statin interferes with your ability to make CoQ10 yourself. L-Carnitine. I actually don't know the contraindications of each individual amino acid because I don't tend to take individual amino acids or promote them at my practice, and that's because the average person that's coming to see me is a female, and she's not coming because she's athletic. So it's just not something that comes up in my practice. I just know that people do use this for energy. So this one I'm suggesting that you'd have to find out on your own whether there's contraindications and what meds it's contraindicated with. The way you do that is just simple internet search, because it's actually really easy to find contraindications today, so long as you got the right terms, which it would be L-Carnitine meds interactions. Good question. If we're going to talk supplements, which we are, because the next thing you guys asked about was protein powder. So, last time we talked about after fueling and how you had a 1 hour window where you had to get a 3-to-1 ratio of carbs to protein into you. And then we talked about how could a person do that, and we talked about was pizza a great way to do that, and I was pointing out, well, it's definitely a carb-heavy meal with some protein, so it's fine. I was just pointing out it's a little bit higher in fat, and it might not clear the stomach really rapidly. So when is the best time to use protein powder? And the answer is in that 1 hour window. If you're not going to be able to make it back to here and get fed, and you're not going to be able to make it back to your house and get fed, you're not going to be able to end up somewhere getting food out. So you're just going to be doing something else where you're distracted and you're not going and obtaining food. Yeah, you really should consider protein powder for the 1 hour window after, versus just saying, oh, well, I don't have a hunger signal, I'm fine, everything's going to be just great. Ideally, you will stir the protein powder. They sell it in packets where it says it stirs into such and such. So it's not saying you have to have a blender. So there's certain brands like Vega where it's saying stir into, and then they list a bunch of different beverage choices. I'm recommending that you stir it into 100% fruit juice or into milk, and that's because you need the carbs. So if you want to utilize protein powder in the 1 hour window, just remember you're also looking for carbs within your beverage. And we know you don't have a blender, in terms of access to one. Chocolate milk came up last time, but it came up as an aside after the class was over. Somebody came up to me and they said, hey, what about chocolate milk? And I said, yeah, the research shows that chocolate milk is the best recovery beverage. They compared it head to head with every other commonly used recovery beverage. And the reason it's so beneficial is it's protein from cow's milk, and then because it's chocolate, it also had carbohydrate in it. It wasn't going to be long-term energy, it was going to be short-term energy, but it was still a very good choice, and it's easy to get even at the convenience store. And then lastly, when you're out on the mission itself, protein powder isn't necessary because we're going to assume you have protein foods in your pack. And if you wanted to have a powder in your pack, we talked about this last time, your best bet would be recovery drink, which already has some amount of protein powder within it, but more importantly, it had a good amount of carbohydrate within it, and it also had electrolytes. So it was the ideal powder to have packed. Any questions on protein powder? Okay. I sent Patty a handout on what to order if you don't have a way of going home and you're going to go hit either a fast food place or you're going to go to a fast casual. And what I did in terms of the creating of that handout is I went and I chose about 3 things off of menus of places that had many locations in town, and it wasn't going to be hard to come across one wherever you were heading to or from. The other way I went about it is I chose low fat, not necessarily low sodium, because remember, this is takeout food, but I also looked at the carb to protein ratio. So other than low fat, I was looking at carb to protein ratio, and that's how I was making my recommendations. I did the best I could with sodium. On that handout that you guys now have, the one thing that's missing from that handout is there's breakfast sandwiches on there. Those are only available until 10 in the morning at many places. So that little side note didn't end up on my handout, but I just want to make sure we talked about it. Another thing that you guys asked about is, okay, but what if I have to stand around in the cold for hours, not moving? What should I have in my pack? And now we're coming into some different territory than anything we've talked about so far because, of course, before I came to speak here a month ago, I didn't know you guys ever stood around. I had no idea you had to stand around in the cold.
Doesn't happen very often.
Okay, but more importantly, I feel for you. Standing around in the cold sounds really difficult. These are the things you'd want to have in your pack if you're going to be standing around in the cold. Butter pats, you'd collect them ahead of time from restaurants, and you'd keep them in your fridge for when you're heading out the door. Should you get to go home, should you get to grab stuff from the fridge before you leave. Otherwise, maybe you can swing by a fast food place and pick some up. Here's another thing to pick up from the fast food place before you head out. Mayo packets. And that's because we're assuming you're already going to have some kind of bread product and maybe even salami in your pack. You want to really add fat to what you're going to consume when you're standing around out in the cold. And as much fat as you can bear in terms of what's palatable to you. There's tuna packed in oil. This would be a great choice for when standing around in the cold. There's also canned chicken packed in oil. It's Trader Joe's, and it's over here on this list pertaining to something different because we haven't gotten to that list yet. But this is just what would you have in your pack if you're going to be standing around in the cold. Olives. So at Trader Joe's, they sell olives that are not in a glass jar. They are in a vacuum-sealed bag. And so they would be packable, and they're entirely shelf-stable. I couldn't tell you their life, but it's long. Anything that's vacuum-sealed, their life's really long. And it's a variety pack of like 3 different flavors of olives. And then there's coconut chips. These are this brand called Bear. And I checked their fat content, and it was quite high. And it's because it's actual coconut meat, and that's why. And those were the things I came up with in terms of what would be palatable to have in your pack. Yes?
Peanut butter?
Oh, sure. We were going to have that in our packs anyway. That was on our original list from class 1. Right, and somebody said they were taking their whole jar of peanut butter that they didn't even mess with those squeezy packs. Oh, same peanut butter eater. Okay.
They'll all be coming to me.
Yes, they ran out. And were you the person that asked about standing around in the cold?
I think so.
Yeah, I think you were too. Without glasses, I don't even know who I'm talking to. So that was that one. Patty asked, what's the best thing to serve when we all get back here? Sub sandwiches we could have, and they would be lower in fat than pizza, unless you were bringing in the meatball ones. So I'm not saying all sub sandwiches. I'm saying the deli meat kind would be lower in fat. They might have a little bit of vegetable within them. I don't know if it's in the budget. It was just an idea. I came up with another one, and that's because everybody in town swears by this food in terms of big food, low cost. Monica's Burritos. So if that was possible to have here, we'd be getting beans, we'd be getting tortilla, we'd be getting a lot of the things that we're after, and possibly even a meat within there, and it would be extremely filling and satisfying. So I don't know if these ideas are helpful, but they are the ones I came up with as alternates to pizza. And if you guys love pizza, if that is like the thing that makes it special coming back from a mission, then you should have pizza. That's my answer.
On whole wheat crust.
On whole wheat crust.
Supreme.
Yes, with veggie toppings so that we can get into the antioxidants, the fiber, the vitamins and minerals.
Olives.
Yeah.
Green pepper.
Yeah. And then you guys can, battle over what the toppings are going to be. Okay, here's something we didn't talk about last time. I came up with a whole list of bar recommendations, and I said, these are the best bets in the bar category. But I don't know that I explained why. It was because they were the most calorie dense, and they taste great. So that's why I had the list of bars that I did last time. But I've added to it. So I have new bars. Last time I had on my list Base Culture. We're all going to eat that really soon because I'm going to wrap in order for us to eat and sample. But my new ones are Taos Mountain. These are substantial. They come in at like 300 calories. And then there's a brand called Zing that is also got a really nice profile, hearty in calories. These are easy to find, those two. Those are not going to be problematic to find when you're in the sports bar section. And then I brought coupons tonight for Orgain, which is a brand of meal replacers, protein powder, but they also make bars. And I think their bars taste great. They're not as calorically dense. That's the only thing about Orgain bars, is they're more snack and not meal replacers. Fueling search dogs. We were going to talk about that. That's what this list is, the foods you could share with the dog. So you could be eating it, they could be eating it. The plain matters in the oatmeal and the popcorn, and that's because the sugar that's in the other flavors is not best designed for dogs, and the butter flavor that's on popcorn is entirely artificial and would not be ideal for dogs. So those were my ideas. I'm sure the people that own the search dogs have other ideas, but I just want to make sure we talked about that today. And then somebody asked about intermittent fasting, and I just want you to know this is very popular right now. Most people are doing it for weight management. It's not due to wanting to improve their performance in athletics. And that doesn't mean it's not popular amongst athletes, and that's because lots of things become popular amongst athletes, but that doesn't mean there's research in support of using this method of fueling for endurance athletes. It just means it's popular. So I'm not saying don't do it, and I'm also saying not to do it. I just want to point out one thing. Intermittent fasting is what everyone has always done who doesn't eat breakfast. So they're already going on a 16-hour fast every single day and eating all of their food within 8 hours. Did they know that's what they were doing? No, they just have a million reasons why they refuse to eat breakfast no matter what a dietitian says. You cannot convince them. They will tell you, I have no appetite, I feel nauseous in the morning. I mean, it's endless, the reasons that people won't eat breakfast. I hate breakfast foods, but the bottom line is they've trained themselves to have no hunger signal at that hour. If they just ate breakfast, in a very short period of time, they would have a hunger signal when they woke up, and they probably wouldn't plate so much at dinner. And here's why that's valuable for those who have never been breakfast eaters. A really large dinner doesn't help a person to assimilate more nutrients from the food. So you're much better off spreading out your fuel throughout the day and not saving up the calories for night. And I'm not saying anyone here would ever do that. I'm just saying a lot of people do. That's their logic. Like, oh, well, dinner is way more fun time to eat food than first thing in the morning, so I'll just pound on it at dinner. So there's two ways to do intermittent fasting. One is the version where you go 16 hours without food and then you eat all your food in an 8-hour window. The other version is 5 days a week you do normal eating. 2 days a week you dramatically restrict your calories to 500 to 600 calories in an entire day, which is equivalent to one meal if you were non-athletic. So who was out there predominantly doing intermittent fasting? The obese and the overweight. And so that's who's been studied so far, because this hasn't been around as a concept that long. But they have already studied the overweight and the obese to find out, are there benefits to intermittent fasting? And here's what the results show. It can make being in a calorie deficit easier for people that need to be in a calorie deficit. It appears that they can lose weight faster than those who are only on a calorie-restricted diet. So here's what the results of the study show. They were able to decrease their triglyceride levels 40% after a meal. This was only studying the overweight and obese. They lost 5% of their body weight in just 59 days, whereas those on a calorie-restricted diet lost it in 73 days. So they took weight off faster. The other benefits that appear to be real with intermittent fasting are that more HGH gets made, which is human growth hormone. And that's probably why some athletes are now wanting to try intermittent fasting, is they've read that piece. It also decreases insulin. That would only be important to those who have a blood sugar issue. It would be far less important to anybody who's athletic. And that's because they're not dealing with wild insulin fluctuations anyway, because athletics takes care of that for people, and they can get away with a whole lot more. Like white flour eating is an example. They can get away with it without it having an impact on their frame or on markers, say, for inflammation. And this is also showing up in the intermittent fasting research, is it appears to lower markers for inflammation. So there's some interesting stuff about intermittent fasting. I can't really recommend it, though, for endurance athletics. I wish I could, but I can't, just because there's so much research on before, during, and after, and exactly how much carbohydrate and protein to be sticking in each one of those windows. That's really not what intermittent fasting is all about. Did anybody have any other questions on intermittent fasting? I'm going to feed you guys now. This is my favorite new product. So this is only sold in the freezer at Sprouts. It's at all 3 Sprouts stores in town. I kept it frozen, and then I kept it refrigerated up until now. And that's because it's real food, and so it can't be stored on a shelf. And it's only got a 14-day shelf life outside of the freezer. So if it's living in your fridge, you just have to monitor that you eat it within 14 days, because you're going to be buying it out of a freezer at Sprouts, and it's going to get shipped to you by Base Culture, should you choose to use this coupon code, in a frozen method. So there's 2 flavors of bread. The breads are pumpkin and banana, and then there are 3 flavors of brownies. The brownies are their best sellers, but I just want to be clear. The brownies have a much higher sugar content than the breads. So I'm going to send this around. Go ahead and take one of whatever, and then you guys might be like, wow, this is really tasty. What is it made from? I didn't get my whole label. It is made from This is a brownie label I'm reading, so that's why it shows up with honey as its first ingredient. The next ingredient's eggs, the next one's cashew butter, then coconut oil, then unsweetened chocolate, almond butter, coconut flour, water, baking soda, cream of tartar, and sea salt. So that's everything that's in the brownie. But you're never going to find another store-bought brownie with 6 grams of protein in it. You will never find one. So there are some benefits to, if you're going to eat dessert, at least buying a dessert with some protein content to it, because it will help offset the 28 grams of sugar in the brownie. I'm not faulting it. I love this product, so please don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, well, you might want to look at the mini breads too, because the breads have a much lower sugar content. So I've got new recipes up here because last time recipes were a hit and people liked them. And if you want different ones this time, I brought them. And last time some of the people that came up and got recipes said, well, this is, I don't really cook. So I brought some where it's really not like cooking. It's more like assembling 4 ingredients. And I'm really glad you guys had me back for part 2 because I learned so much at the first one about what to bring back to the second, and I just felt far more confident this time. So, thank you.
Great, thank you. Also, what's coming around, those are like breads that you keep frozen and just pull them out of the freezer when you...
Yeah. And
how long can they stay unfrozen, you say?
2 weeks in the fridge.
On the fridge. What about out of the fridge?
Oh, so let's say you took it with you on a mission. We will assume it's at the bottom of the pack and not being exposed to heat, like in the summertime, and it's going to be just fine. Or eat it sooner during the mission, because these are really high calorie, and that's why they've become my favorite bar, is they're like 300 calories in a bar. And when I want to utilize a bar in endurance athletics, I wouldn't carry anything that was low cal, because I'm going to need fuel while I'm out there for hours and hours. And so that's how I go about buying bars, is the highest calories I can get for what I'm going to be carrying, whether that's backpacking or whatever purpose. Let me get another bag going in a different direction so that we make sure we have enough. And you might even, I don't know how many people's in this room, so I don't want to give people a second one until I know that I can. But I'm not sure we've got enough back there to make it to the front. So please have whatever you'd like. Yeah.
Hey, Martha, one of the things you mentioned the other time, I think it was Flax for Life muffins.
Oh, yeah.
Where did you find them?
Oh, those are at Natural Grocers, and they're not even in the fridge.
Natural Grocers.
Yeah, they're on a freestanding rack, a wood rack, and they come in blueberry and different flavors. Yeah. Okay. So the thing. Oh, I'm sorry. Here you go. The thing I wanted to say about the pumpkin and the banana minis is that they had half the sugar of a brownie. Yeah. The brownies are so good. And I think a person could feel good about brownie eating if it was made with the ingredients I just mentioned. And I apologize, I didn't have a label with me to tell you what's the exact ingredients in a bread. Okay, so I don't know how to be fair, but I don't have to go home with these.
Okay.
So
I will just leave them up there, and
okay.
if you walk out the door, there'll be a word.
Okay, I'd be happy to. Okay, yeah. No, wait. Shouldn't it be the oldest person since we did senior nutrition? But I'm really glad you guys like this product because, I'm not like Oprah. I only get excited about certain foods, and then the rest of them, it's like, they're not good. Why would I be recommending them to the public? But every once in a while, something comes along that I think is fantastic. And I reached out to this company and I told them, how impressed I was with their products, and that's why they were willing to send this for us tonight. But it was also because of who the audience was. They really understood the value of this speaking engagement in terms of getting it into your hands. And
What's the name again?
Base Culture. Oh, I'll write it on the board. And this is the coupon code if you buy it from their website. And they're out of Florida. And it's based on paleo concepts.
How long do they last if they're frozen?
8 months, I think. They had a long shelf life. Like, they came to me a month ago, and they had until August. So I guess that's 6 month shelf life in the freezer. Yeah. Yeah.
Coconut oil, is that, so I've heard two different things. One, it's great for you, and two, it's horrible for you.
I think that's really good that you brought that up. So when coconut oil first started showing up, and it wasn't coconut milk in a can any longer that you cook Asian curries with, people were already making all kinds of wild health claims like, well, this saturated fat is totally different than any other saturated fat. And those in my profession, we had to be a little bit more reserved, like the jury's out, you know, it's still a saturated fat. But since then, research has come out in support of that not all saturated fats are created equal. So no one is advocating for saturated fat in meat, meaning beef, pork, chicken, turkey. No one is advocating for that in terms of what does research show. But plenty of research now shows that the saturated fat that's in dairy is nowhere near as problematic as beef, pork, chicken, and turkey. And I'm not saying not to eat those 4 types of meat or even lamb. What I'm saying is there's lean cuts of all those types of protein foods. It's not about not eating beef and pork. But a lot of people think that 80% lean ground beef, oh, well, then it's lean if it's 80%. So anyway, I don't think anybody thinks it's as evil as they used to. But here's where I have to add a caveat. All the research is in support of things like olive oil, grapeseed oil, so liquid plant oils. And that's because they were around in different cultures' diets to conduct studies on, and these peoples were outliving the rest of us. And so they got to studying those populations long ago, and there is so much research in support of really good quality plant oils. And so I would say use both, you know. Coconut oil actually makes an okay baked good. I don't think it makes as good of a baked good as butter, but I don't have time to bake, so I mean it's not really relevant to me in terms of my home kitchen. But I think there is a place for coconut oil. I try to when I'm working with my patients, I try to tone them down in their enthusiasm, because they will only consume coconut oil and nothing else once they catch wind of, you know, the latest trend. And so I just try to have everybody like, okay, yeah, but there's also some really good research on olive oil. Would you consider it? I'm leaving the Base Culture full wrapper up here because I cut the samples in half and not everybody can read their wrapper. But that's why I'm leaving that up here. I am going to take recipes unless you guys think, no, we want them. Okay. And then I've got some Orgain coupons. Should I just leave a few in case you guys want them? Yeah. Did you have a question?
What's the difference between sea salt and non-sea salt?
Oh, okay. So the only one you would want to not choose is iodized. So you can choose anything else you want. Celtic salt, sea salt, whatever else you want. There's something called real salt that comes out of Utah, Redmond, Utah, and it has a full mineral profile in it. It's not just sodium. So don't feel like you have to go get some fancy special salt when something like real salt exists. I'm just steering you away from iodized, and it's because iodized does not have the full mineral complement.
But there's nothing special about sea salt?
not oversay any of the others like Celtic salt or, there's like 50 of them now. They're all in the book bin even at Mountain Mama's. You don't even have to buy them in a jar. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
And one last thing. Thank you again for last week.
You guys gotta take about 5 minutes.